because dance is often regarded as very therapeutic practice, physically and emotionally. And recently it's been looked at for its cognitive benefits potentially. So specifically how dance may have a preventative and beneficial relationship with memory. The evidence for this possible relationship is the research being done for neurological disorders such as dementia and Alzheimer's. There's current research being done looking at how dance may improve or serve as a preventative measure against these disorders. Okay. But this research is only isolated to the older adult population, has not really been looked at in the young adult population. So this study is hoping to expand on that field of research. So we are looking at the relationship between dance and memory, specifically working memory in the young adult population. So we will be looking at behavioral differences between dancers and non-dancers on working memory tests. All these differences will be measured using two subtests of the test of learning and memory, second edition, better known as the TOML-2. We had 20 neurologically healthy participants, eight of which were dancers and 12 were non-dancers. Dancers were defined as having 1 or more years of dance experience, and non-dancers were defined as having less than 1 year or no dance experience at all. We had, out of the dancers, we had 2 advanced dancers, 4 intermediate dancers, and 2 novice dancers. We selected the criteria for advanced, intermediate, and novice based on the experience they did in the dance history questionnaire. So we defined advanced dancers having 9 or more years total dance experience, or training 10 or more hours a week for at least 3 years. Intermediate dancers defined as having 3 to 8 years of total dance experience, or training 10 or more hours per week for at least 2 years. And then novice dancers defined as having 1 to 2 years of total dance experience. As mentioned above, the behavioral measures used was the TOML-2, and out of that, we used the 2 subtests, abstract visual memory, and the digit backwards. Our hypothesis for this research was one, dancers will score higher on memory tests than non-dancers, and 2, advanced dancers will score higher on memory tests than intermediate and novice dancers. We have the data, the mean scores from the TOML-2. So above first graph is the dancers versus non-dancers, and A is abstract visual. So out of 39 dancers had an average score of 29.6, and non-dancers had an average score of 30.7. For digits backwards, the max score was 64, and dancers had a mean score of 42.9, non-dancers had 44.2. Looking at this, we see that non-dancers scored higher on working memory tests. However, the differences were not statistically significant. When we look at how dance experience plays into this, we can see that advanced dancers, intermediate dancers, and novice dancers all scored pretty similarly, with advanced and novice scoring the exact same on abstract visual. When we look at digits backwards, we see that advanced dancers actually scored the highest. However, it was not significant either. This graph here demonstrates visually the mean differences between the dancers and non-dancers, with abstract visual scores in blue and the digits backwards scores in red, with dancers being on the left and non-dancers being on the right.
So I'm going to give you guys a little bit of a description of what each of the tests that we use entailed. So the abstract visual working memory test, we showed our participants one shape on one page for 5 seconds. and then we turned the page, and it showed them a lineup of, I believe, six images that looked similar to the first image that we showed them. And we had our participants select which out of those images were the identical one to the first one that we showed. And that one was scored out of 39 points, correct? And for the digits backwards subtest, that one, we as the researchers, we would say a series of digits to our participants. And for example, I would say 4, 1, and the participant would have to recite that series of digits backward. They would say 1, 4. And throughout the course of that test, the series of digits would get longer, I believe, going up to 12 digits. So for the analysis of our data, we did an independent samples t-test to determine the difference between dancers and non-dancers on both of the subtests of the two. And we used one way ANOVA to compare the levels of dance experience to see which group performed better on the subtests. So comparing dancers versus non-dancers, we actually found that dancers scored lower on both subtests, but not significantly lower. On the digits backwards subtest, dancers scored just over one standard deviation below the mean of both groups. And on the abstract visual test, they scored about one third of a standard deviation below the mean. And between the different levels of dance experience, we determined that there was not a significant effect on the score on their score on both of the subtests. And we determined so for both of the subtests, we determined that there was not a statistically significant difference between experience groups. So in conclusion of our study, we did not find any significant data. While there was some difference that we saw in our data, there wasn't anything that met threshold to show that it was significant. And mainly we point to our small sample sizes for that, because we had 8 participants in the dance category and 12 participants in the non-dance category. So moving forward, should we continue studying this, we would like to have larger sample sizes, probably at least 30 in each sample if we can get that. Just because with our small sample sizes, we think that our samples are actually representing their populations accurately. And there is a lot of individual differences seen in this. So yeah. Any questions?
Yes. I was surprised going into this. Me and my faculty advisor, Dr. Greenwald, we were kind of suspecting that dancers would score higher. I feel like that's a general idea that people have about dancers, that we're better at memory and stuff. So it was kind of interesting, but of course this isn't really conclusive of anything, so we can't say that we are worse than non-dancers. Yes. Abstract visual measures visual memory, and then the digits backwards measures auditory memory. And since counting and musicality is so important in dance, I chose the numbers backwards because I felt like that would be helpful to kind of gauge that in dancers. And visual memory, dance is also very visual, like replicating movement you've seen based on your instructors or other dancers. So I wanted to choose those two as a kind of preliminary test. Yes. I would have to look through the TOMAL to kind of see, because it has like 13 subtests, and so we only selected two. But yes, I want to look at different subtests and hopefully look at this on a more in-depth scale as well. Thank you.
Okay, I do have the tendency to speak quietly, so let me know if I need to speak up. Okay, so my name is Kadi Grieve, and I'm in the Nutrition 14-month master's program. And for my project, I developed a sports nutrition manual for high school athletes. So here's a brief overview of what I'm going to be talking about. I'm going to begin with an introduction, followed by a brief review of literature, which will lead us to the significance and purpose of the manual. And then I'll describe my methods for manual development, followed by a few page examples with time for questions at the end. So, adolescence is a time of profound physical, mental, and emotional change. We see fluctuations in metabolic and hormonal levels, changes in body mass, and throughout this whole time, proper nutrition is critical to ensure physiological potential is met. Because they are still growing, there are elevated nutrition and nutrient needs, which makes this particular time high potential for deficiency. So with this in mind, how are adolescents currently doing? It probably comes as no surprise that they're not doing very well. We see an excess consumption of sugar-sweetened beverages during this time, as well as empty calories, with empty calories being those that provide a lot of energy or calories, usually in the form of saturated fat or added sugar, while also contributing little to no nutritional value. One study found that 40% of adolescent total energy is actually from empty calories, those sources being primarily soda and fruit drinks, pizza, whole milk, and dairy and grain desserts. We are also seeing a high incidence of skipped meals during this time. One study found that 55% of athletes, high schoolers, reported eating breakfast daily. And so this is concerning because breakfast consumption is associated with increased concentration throughout the day, better grades, and increased athletic performance as well. And if you think about it, because energy and nutritional needs are so high during this time period, skipping breakfast is essentially skipping a time to get an energy or a nutrient dense meal. So they're missing out on that potential meal as well. We also see decreased fruit and vegetable intake. One study found that 7% of students meet USDA fruit recommendations and only 2% met vegetable recommendations. So these numbers are quite low, which again is concerning because they are still growing and need those additional nutrients to support that growth. We are also seeing increasing rates of obesity, similar to trends across America. One study found that 21.2% of adolescents aged 12 to 19 years were obese in 2017 to 2018. So shifting our focus a little bit further onto adolescent athletes are unique from their non-athletic counterparts in that they need proper nutrition not only to support those growth and development needs, but also to meet those training and competition demands. So their needs are even higher. And proper nutrition is critical for athletic performance. If you aren't fueled your best, you're not going to be playing your best. Additionally, in athletic populations, particularly adolescent athletic population, we see high risk of disordered eating, especially for those who emphasize leanness for optimal performance. So think gymnastics, figure skating, wrestling, etc. So despite the importance of nutrition during this time, we do see decreased nutrition education in schools. There's a decrease in public schools providing required nutrition education, down from 84.6% in 2000 to 74.1% in 2014. And despite the 40 to 50 hours needed to promote a positive behavioral change, only 8 hours are provided of nutrition education each year, if it's provided at all. One study found that 79.5% of middle schoolers and 92.5% of high schoolers said that they would benefit from nutrition education. Additionally, another study found that high school athletes scored an average of 45.6% for general nutrition knowledge, and only 20 to 35% of high school athletes thought that their diet met their nutritional needs. So this is quite low. So where are their sources of information coming from? Primarily from non-professional individuals. So 80% rely on coaches for nutrition information. And this is concerning because one study found that sufficient knowledge was only found in 39.5% of collegiate coaches. And if you think for a moment, it's collegiate coaches' jobs to ensure that their athletes are performing to the best of their potential. So they have more incentive to familiarize themselves with adequate nutrition education. whereas high school coaches are primarily on a volunteer basis and usually are from our teachers at the school themselves. So they might not have the time nor the incentive to familiarize themselves with sound nutrition education. 82.5% obtain nutrition information from parents and 32.5% from friends. And what's also concerning is 45% rely on the internet and 32.5% rely on social media. And while you can find good nutrition information out there, there's so much misinformation, and adolescents aren't necessarily taught how to kind of differentiate between fact and fiction in those regards. So, oh, I apologize. I left out one thing on this slide. Hiring a registered dietitian is impractical for many public schools due to the restricted budget, particularly as it relates to sports teams, which rely primarily on fundraisers, ticket sales, and parent contribution. On average, parents spend about $651 per child annually for sporting costs in the United States, with 14% of high school students who didn't participate in sports saying that the reason was the cost was too high. So this really necessitates an affordable, reliable, and easy to use resource, which leads me to my purpose, which was to provide high school athletes, parents, and coaches a free and reliable source of nutrition information. Okay. So, review of literature was conducted via PubMed utilizing words like adolescent nutrition, high school nutrition, adolescent athletes, etc. And I chose to do a manual and an infographic-like format due to the kind of simplified nature of an infographic and the ability to quickly and clearly convey information and visual representations of information, data, and knowledge. After the manual was written, a Flesch-Kincaid readability test was conducted via Grammarly to ensure use of the 8th grade reading level throughout. This will be free and downloadable on the Washington State Dairy Council, as well as the Washington State Interscholastic Activities Association. And because of this, no inclusion or exclusion criteria were identified. It is intended, but not limited to, high school athletes, so ages about 14 to 18, as well as their parents and coaches. So here is the table of contents for the manual, beginning with macronutrients and micronutrients, followed by example training plates, hydration, fuel for exercise, so pre, during, and post-exercise meals, ergogenic aids, disordered eating and relative energy deficiency in sports, simple meals to make at home, snacks on the go, navigating the school cafeteria and fast food options, grocery shopping, and concluding with take-home tips and summary. So here are a few example pages. You see on the, I believe your left, I focused on iron. Athletes have higher iron needs. And so they have a higher risk for deficiency, that is why I focused on it. And then here is I don't know if you can see the arrow, but a carbohydrate timing. So this graph just really quickly and clearly conveys that you need to gradually be eating less before your meal. And then a hydration page as well. So in conclusion, nutrition is critical for proper growth and development and for athletic success. And despite this, there's a severe lack of nutrition education currently for high school students, which creates a very high risk for deficiency in this age group. A free and downloadable manual is an easy, accessible, and effective way to educate high school athletes, parents, and coaches. And questions? Yeah, it will be available for download on the Washington State Dairy Council website, as well as the Washington State Interscholastic Activity Association. But if you want to print it and download it, you do have to go to those websites. That's a great question. I was probably going to email it to a few of the schools I know and then hope it spreads kind of through word of mouth. But yeah, that is an excellent question. Mhm. Yeah, it's my hope too that students after me, especially now that the nutrition department has that project option, that other students can make videos, perhaps on YouTube or TikTok or what have you, kind of conveying the information in a different way, because reading isn't going to be the best learning way for everyone. And so I hope that further students can also take this and spread it, if that makes sense. But yeah, that is an excellent point, that it won't necessarily be advertised. I don't know if you need to log in.
I don't know how to bring up my presentation. Oh, there it is. I figured it out. Yeah. Yeah, there's a file. I brought it up. It's right here. Okay. Yeah, and it's public health. So Sammy's will be next. I guess I have 5 minutes. A minute. Okay. Cool. Yeah. Hello. So as Dr. Pritchett said, my name is Mallory Isley, and I am a 14-month graduate program here at Central Washington University, and I am going to be presenting my master's project. So my research question was, does self-proclaimed food literacy have an impact on Central Washington University students' ability to match age to their age of origin? So you might be wondering what Around the World in a survey is. So it was developed by members of the Menus University Research Collaborative, or MCURC, which is a national organization that is co-led by the Culinary Institute of America and Harvard University. So members of MCURC that were undergraduate students at Rutgers University developed this survey in particular that were led by Dr. Peggy Pellegrau. So this survey asked students to match 8 foods to their 8 countries of origin. These 8 foods being hummus, codfish, bok choy, samosas, lentil stew, quinoa, pierogi, and corn tortillas. Either ate origin, Lebanon, Portugal, China, India, Ethiopia, Peru, and Mexico. And I added a question pertaining to food literacy to this survey. So, it took a while to develop my food literacy question. It was partly developed through my literature review. And as soon as I started researching food literacy, I learned that it encompasses many aspects of the system. So it's a very complex, dynamic term that continues to grow. It includes preparation, household food production, nutrition behaviors, social connectedness, food security, safety, cooking skills, assessment of diet quality, marketing, and science, and many more. It continues to grow. So the question I added to the survey, it was very important that it was understood by survey takers, and it was also important that it accurately measured food literacy. So at first I just wanted to ask how people would rate their self-perceived food literacy, but I realized that a lot of people taking the survey may not understand what food literacy means. As I said before, it's very dynamic. And encompasses a lot of aspects of the food system. So I thought I would define the term food literacy in my question a bit and ask students if they felt confident in their knowledge skills and attitudes towards food. However, that doesn't encompass all aspects of food literacy. So I decided, I wanted to go with possibly a proxy for food literacy that was a little better understood by students. So I took the term good with food from a study done in 2014 that actually was aiming to define food literacy, and they asked younger people that weren't experts in nutrition and dietetics if they thought of themselves being good with food, and then they found consistencies between that proxy food literacy and asking experts about food literacy, kind of meaning that it could be a proxy for food literacy. However, I kind of found that might be a little confusing just asking someone if they're good with food. So I wanted to avoid questions when people were taking the survey. So I decided to take a little bit of the wording from the definition actually developed from that study that I just mentioned, and ask people to rate their ability optimally in order to meet their needs. And then I asked them to rate themselves on a Likert scale. If you're not familiar with the Likert scale, it's a 5-point scale that you've seen on a lot of surveys if you've ever taken one. And so mine, it first asks, you can rate yourself as being very poor, neutral, good, or very good at being able to eat optimally in order to meet your needs. So my study purpose was to determine if self-claimed confidence in literacy had an impact on students' ability to match their age and origin. So I wanted to see if better food literacy possibly correlated with higher scores of matching foods to age country origin. So how did I do this? Well, I administered a survey on CWU campus in 3 high-traffic locations. 2 of those were actually downstairs here at CERT, near dining and near the mobile pickup order area. And I surveyed those 2 areas during lunchtime. And then on the other side of campus, Northside Commons, in the Appendix order line during dinner time. And did this for consecutive days in January of this year. We had an entire setup with a poster board that showed a map with the highlighted countries of origin and the foods. So students would scan a QR code that we had up at the table and bring up the survey on their smart device. So either a phone that they had on hand or provided a tablet if their phone could not pick up the QR code. It would bring up the survey on a website called Tricks. People would take it, and then after they were done, they received prize despite how they did on survey how well they did, which there were stress ball stickers, reusable straws, and sunglasses, and we were partnered with CWU Dining, so all of those prizes were provided by CWU Dining. So the main findings from my data collection were that through one-way ANOVA analysis, or that students' self-perceived literacy did not affect their ability to match eight food states of origin. And also CWU did poorly at matching the foods to the respective countries of origin overall. And actually only one student out of our sample size of 155 national eight foods to country of origin correctly. And a very interesting finding that was also found through one-way ANOVA correlation is that students who identified as binary or third gender on the survey did significantly better than binary genders. So I thought it would be good to kind of show how people rated their self-perceived food literacy overall. So a majority of students rated themselves as being or having neutral or good ability to eat optimally in order to meet their needs. And then there were fewer students that rated themselves as being very poor, or even very good. So to conclude, students' self-perceived literacy had no impact on their ability to match eight foods to their eight countries of origin. And it's possible that my singular question to measure food literacy wasn't enough. Because in previous studies, to measure food literacy, they used a self-perceived literacy scale, or the SPFLS, which was a 29 item measurement scale with 5-point scales for each question that was measured within 8 subscales as well. So see how complex food literacy is, and possibly my question measure it correctly or accurately. And why did students do poorly overall? Through my study, I found that it's possible that could be due to the external validity of the original survey, regional differences between the original survey at Rutgers University in New Jersey and here in Washington State. And then I also learned the term dietary acculturation, which is the dietary changes that occur among immigrants in a new host society. Immigrants tend to shift from consuming primarily from their origin to foods. Food choices and eating patterns of their host race. So through generations, it's possible that information from those countries of origin on the survey could have been lost by students here at CWU. So I will now open for questions and comments. Oh. So actually, I don't know. We didn't really ask that question on the survey. There were actually two other questions added by additional researchers. So Sammy actually used this survey as well, and she'll be presenting next. And then there was another question that someone added about I think traveling to different countries. So that would have given data if that person had ended up finishing the project and presenting. And then you had a question? The average score. I don't have that off of the top of my head, actually. Just I do know that the students did poorly overall, and we just didn't find any significance. So I didn't really report the average. Okay, that's good to know. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. It'll be good for future studies. Any other questions? Oh.
Yeah, so they just did poorly at matching this to country of origin. So there were a lot of people that only matched like two, like on average. Or, I mean, I don't know the average overall, but I know that we were seeing that only two countries in particular were popping up as being matched like most frequently. Yeah. No, that was just the terminology that I used to describe it. Yeah. Yes. I think if I had more time, I would have wanted to use a self-perceived literacy scale. I obviously this survey was seen like as people were passing by, like just scanning a QR code. So taking an entire self-perceived literacy scale questionnaire would have taken much too time, and people would have gotten bored and left. So I think that if I could actually get people come in and sit down and take my survey, I would have used that and compared it to the 8 matching. I think there might be a question in the. I don't think that's for me. That was a long time ago. But any other questions? Well, thank you. Very broad experience.
No, I'll wait for two. It's fine.
Hi, my name's McDaniel. The title of my project was Eating Out at Restaurants, increase the college students' knowledge on origins. And so my main research purpose was to evaluate the rate of eating out affects college students' ability to match cultural foods to their country of origin. And the foods on the side are the 8 matching questions that we used. And I developed this research question and research aim because there were a lot of studies through my literature that focused on the negative aspects of eating out. And while that is important, I wanted to look on knowledge-based facts. And this is a continuation of a study from another university that I'll explain in just a moment. And so I'm going to explain it through my methods. And so the original survey was done, as you heard before, by Dr. Pellicastro at Rutgers University. And this is connection menus of change, or NCURC. And it was originally used as an educational tool to teach people about different cultural foods. But I wanted to use it as a way to look at how the frequency of eating out affects the ability to match food to their country's origin. And so the participants of the study, it was a one-shot convenience sample design, only Central Washington students. And in total, we had 105 participants. And we did allow those who were not students to take the survey just fairness, they weren't included in the study. And the design and procedure was we worked with dining services to find high traffic times to where we could survey the best and get the most people. And we surveyed at 3 locations, two of which were here in the Cirque, and one of which was at Northside Commons or Panda Express. And we did this in 3 consecutive days. And on the table was a poster board with a map of where these countries were located, and the randomly on the side with their names. And we had prizes to attract people, so they would come over and talk to us. But they got a prize, no matter what, just for completion. And we used a QR code to collect the data called XM in that tracks participation data. And so the survey itself was made up of these questions. My question in particular was how many times a month eat at a restaurant, not including dining or fast food. And I really wanted to look at restaurant intake due to a lot of the studies really including fast food and restaurants or including campus dining. But I all in all wanted to look just at restaurants' influence. And so for my question, a ANOVA and relation regression analysis was used. And to look at the demographic data, compare it to the 8 matching questions, ANOVA was used. And we used Excel software and SPSS to analyze the data. And so the results in discussion of what happened in the study. The prevalence of correct answers among participants was low overall. Again, only 1 person out of 55 got all the questions correct. And this could be a lot of things, regional differences. Rutgers University, where the study was originally developed, is on the East Coast, Central Washington, on the West Coast. Create a lot of knowledge, regional differences. And question structure itself was different. At Rutgers University, the country for food, you could not select those again. But with Central Washington survey, as we were looking at knowledge, not education, we had all countries listed under each food, and you could select a country for multiple food options if a participant so wished. And so there was a significant gender as non-binary gender students significantly better on average because binary on average 35% of questions correct, while non-binary students got around 53 of the questions correct on average. And we can't exactly say why, as not many studies on non-binary people or students in general. But there are differences between male and female eating habits. For example, males eat out more than females, especially if they're single. And then I would like on to my question. And to my dismay, it was not significant, but there was a slight negative correlation. And you can see this and on the graph on the y-axis is total correct answers that each participant got and the number of times they ate out in a month. In the green dots represent the participants. And the orange dots represent the way the graph should fall. And it does fall within the orange dots prediction. And you see the slight negative correlation as the orange dots are not completely covering the green dots. But again, not statistically significant. And what it means is the more you eat out, the less you know about cultural foods. But again, not significant and can't be made to a true statement. It's just trending towards that way. And the limitations of this study wasn't designed for Central Washington University students. It was originally designed at Rutgers University. We didn't collect ethnicity data or eating habits, which could have given insight to our lack of significant results. And we had limited time and limited space to do this study. And so I'm on to acknowledgements of course, my committee members who helped me as well as Connections. And Dr. Peggy designed the study in the first place. And then questions. I believe there were 13. Okay. We had a statistician do this regression analysis on the data that was ungrouped. So I definitely would like to hear what you have to say after. Yeah. Oh, how it was laid out. It started with three research questions, and then it went to the eight matching questions. Yeah. So there would be a food item, bok choy, and then it would have all the 8 countries options listed underneath. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. If we had added a question where they ate out and maybe have it in right where you eat out, maybe some correlation, and that probably for a future survey could be added. But I do think it could cause like could look into either the lack of significant results or show different results. We chose to do it because it was the most accessible demographic here at Central Washington, and it would be easy to collect that data through passing in student-oriented areas like the Northside Commons. Oh. Those foods were originally selected for Rutgers University, and so we took those foods that were selected and put them into our survey as well. I was not looking at food literacy. I was thinking about how many someone ate out in a month at restaurants. But I can't really hear you. I didn't hear the question. Yeah. Oh. Should be one of those. I don't know.
Yeah, the clocks are off. I'm so sorry about that.
I'm going off my watch.
Okay, it looks like our settings are all good to go. So, I think the folder's like, okay. So as of right this second, it's thank you.
Okay, can you guys hear me? Okay, so I'll be presenting again on the risks of low energy availability, disordered eating, and menstrual dysfunction in collegiate female runners. So I'm just going to skip through my outline and get right into the introduction, looking at disordered eating. So we know the population of endurance athletes, they're at pretty high risk for developing behaviors of just eating or the misguided thoughts around food and exercise. And the restrictive nature of disordered eating patterns can lead into some health consequences such as low energy availability and a lot of complications that might come with that. And so why do we see this? We see an emphasis on body composition or lower fat mass, just smaller body size, or either perceived performance advantages or manipulation for aesthetic reasons. And so disordered eating can really exist along a spectrum throughout an athlete's career. So you see that initial emphasis on body composition, and this can lead to some sort of obsession or hyperfixation on reaching those goals, whether it's a weight goal or if it's for their performance benefit. And this can lead an athlete to either restricting their intake and having a really low caloric intake, or increase their training volume, running volume to maybe make up for that. Really, this can lead into being characterized as diagnosable eating disorder. And so now kind of look at the concept of low energy availability and what that looks like in this context. So you can see this equation up here can be used to quantify one's energy availability when using those metrics of energy intake and exercise energy expenditure. And this gives us a way to quantify if we have enough energy available for basic physiological functions throughout the day as well as exercise. So we can quantify it at an optimal level or at a clinically low level. And so this brings me to discussing some of the risks that come with this, such as different changes in metabolism, increased injury risk, menstrual dysfunction, and just kind of a dysregulation of overall health. And so these athletes are at an inherent risk for disordered eating. And this can be a cause of low energy availability or relative energy deficiency in sport. And this can be unintentional or intentional, whether we see those disordered eating habits or just the increase in training volume that we might see at the collegiate level. And so we know there's a pretty high prevalence, again, in female athletes, maybe more so than males, and in endurance-type runners as well, both at the elite level and collegiate level. And so low energy availability can really lead to kind of a main component is menstrual dysfunction is one of the telltale signs. And so this can happen from different hormone fluctuations where we don't have enough energy to support the body having a menstrual cycle. And this drop in hormones can then lead to risk for injury, bone mineral density. And so we see injury risk as one of the components as well. And about half of endurance athletes or runners see changes in their menstruation once they have increased training or increased running volume. So this brings me to the purpose and what I looked at in studies. So investigated the risk of disordered eating, the risk of low energy availability, and then the prevalence of menstrual dysfunction among female collegiate runners. So this study was a survey, and it was sent out to NCAA collegiate track and cross runners. Through an online survey, and so the participants filled out the survey that assessed their risk for these factors. And so this slide here shows some of the main components of what was included in the survey. So there was questions about injury, the incidence of stress fractures, questions about weight control or weight satisfaction, if they were trying to change their weight anyway. It asked questions about eating or history or presence of a current eating disorder, as well as changes in their menstrual cycle or hormonal contraceptive use, which might cause change as well. And then lastly, it looked at gastrointestinal function and any changes that we might see in that regard. And so this here further down the survey. So there were two tools that are previously validated to assess both low energy availability and disordered eating. So this first one on the left, the LEAF, so this is the low energy availability females questionnaire, and
These questions outline risk for injury, GI dysfunction, menstrual dysfunction, and the way to quantify or score if they were at high risk for LEA or if their risk was considered low. And similarly, the DESIS here in the middle, which is disordered eating screen athlete. This questionnaire also was used to score athletes for being either at high risk for disordered eating or being at low risk. So this asks questions about changes in weight, restriction, and weight satisfaction as well. And then some other questions were also included, asking about prior eating disorder diagnosis, and their training volume and their current race distance. So moving into the results of what we found, so pretty consistent with literature, we saw a substantial amount of runners were at risk for low energy availability, again using that leaf scoring. So almost 57%. And again, almost 77% were identified as having menstrual dysfunction, and this was scored using the menstrual function question from the leaf scoring guidelines. And then further, we saw 42.5% were identified as being at risk for disordered eating when using the scoring system from the DESIS-6. And so this chart breaks it down a little bit further into division 1, 2, 3. And so you can see we got the highest amount of participants from division 1 runners. And this group also had highest in-group risk for low energy availability. And pretty consistent among the divisions. You can see that over half at risk for LEA, and also over half had menstrual dysfunction, and then about 40-45% were at risk for disordered eating across all three divisions. And here we have some examples of the menstrual function questions that were included in the survey. So just to show some examples, on the left, you see a question asking if they had regular periods. And almost 40% reported no, that they don't get their period every 28 to 34 days. And then in the middle here, asking about how many cycles they've had in the past year, and over 100 athletes reported to have less than 8 periods in the last 12 months. And then finally on the right, this question was asking when they had their last period, and again over 100 athletes responded to having their period over 2 months ago, which could show signs of oligomenorrhea or total absence of a menstrual cycle. And lastly, this chart looks at the disordered eating risk, again broken up by division 1, 2, and 3. So again, we had the most responses from division 1, but across the board, we saw over 40% were at risk for disordered eating among D1, D2, and D3. And so inclusion, we see that there is a high risk among this population for both LEA and disordered eating, and for developing some of those health consequences that go along with that. And so with this high prevalence, we know that this necessitates some sort of intervention or education for these athletes, and really preventative measures among the population of female collegiate runners. So with that, any questions? Yes. Mm-hmm. I think it's maybe the time span that the research has been looking at that. I think in recent years it's more that 5%. Yeah. I think it was diagnosis, and yeah, to that point, I think a lot of the information is self-reported eating disorders, so not necessarily a diagnosis. So that's usually taken a measurement like on like a DEXA scan or something like that, and so it's anything that is I guess it's just right, free mass, muscle and skeletal, yeah. Yes. I would guess that maybe just at a higher level, maybe they have a higher training volume than maybe Division 2 and 3. Yeah, I think that might be close to what you might see with elite athletes or professional where it's almost like their job. Yes. Yes. Honestly, I haven't looked into categorizing it by how many miles that they have run, but we did ask. I think it went up to 80 miles a week, and it was a multiple choice question. Yeah, and that can be the next part because it's a whole another year. Yeah. Yes, we did, and that's also kind of one of the next part is to separate if they're on birth control versus not, because that can have a huge difference when defining menstrual dysfunction. Any other questions? I just figured that that's what it presentation.
So first things first, just a quick brief understanding of what energy availability is. So it is the difference between your energy intake versus your energy expended through exercise in regards to fat-free mass. So based off of this value that you get, you're going to kind of apply it to these guidelines that I have like in the blue box. So ideally we want an optimal energy availability of above 45 calories per kilogram of fat-free mass. However, once we go below this, especially where we're in this clinical low energy availability state, which is less than 30 calories per kilogram of fat-free mass, that's where we're going to start to see functions of the body kind of have issues. So not only does the caloric intake that you have affect your performance, it's going to affect your body as well. So that's what I have on this chart on the right. So this is also what's known as relative energy deficiency in sport. So you can imagine athletes are at a higher risk of this just due to a higher exercise and training load. In addition, someone who is chronically restricting energy intake, whether that is unintentional or through disordered eating or an eating disorder, puts someone also at a higher risk for low energy availability. So disordered eating is one of the key factors of low energy availability, and it's defined as someone who is consistently skipping meals, compulsive eating and or exercise, and restrictive eating without fully meeting the criteria for an eating disorder. Individuals who are endurance-based athletes compared to non-athletes have a higher prevalence of disordered eating. And it's about double, and that's what my statistic is there in the second box. In addition, female athletes also have a higher risk of disordered eating, and this is just primarily due to an emphasis on body composition and manipulation, just for aesthetic or competitive reasons. So menstrual dysfunction is something else that is compromised when we have that low energy availability. Primary or secondary amenorrhea is something that it occurs when we do not have enough energy to support healthy menstruation. So primary amenorrhea being someone who fails to menstruate prior to the age of 15. And then secondary is someone who misses 3 consecutive periods who was previously menstruating regularly. This is something that, if it's chronic, it will eventually impact the bone due to a decreased estrogen, which increases your bone loss. So therefore, that just brings me to the aim of my study, which is to investigate the prevalence of menstrual dysfunction, risk of disordered eating, and low energy availability in female recreational runners. So the way we recruited our individuals was we used virtual flyers and posts on Instagram and Twitter. We also contacted a few running groups via email. The primary subjects that we were looking at were adults between the ages of 18 and 40, female of all gender or all ethnicities, and then anyone who identified as a recreational runner. And for the purpose of this study, that was someone who was running a minimum of 21 miles a week and was not associated with a collegiate, Olympic, or an elite team. We also, for the first 200 people who responded, received a $20 Amazon gift card. So we had anyone who wanted to participate in our study, we could either direct message them through Instagram or Twitter, as well as send them an email, or they also could scan the QR code on the virtual flyer that I just showed. That will link them to the survey. They will just read a quick informed consent, just overview of the survey and whatnot. If they decided to continue on with the survey, they would finish it, and then at the end, it would ask them if they wanted to proceed with the Amazon gift card. If they did, that would link them to a separate survey where they would put in their contact information. This survey was not linked back to the original survey response, so we couldn't figure out whose answers was who based off of the contact information. And then if they did not want to participate, it would just end, the survey would end there. And then in total, the survey was 45 questions. It included descriptive characteristics, which height, age, weight, things like that. And then the remainder included type of runner, exercise duration and mileage per week, primary event for competition, other types of exercise, stress fractures, weight control methods, weight satisfaction, diagnosed eating disorder or disordered eating, menstrual function, contraceptive use, and gastrointestinal function. So within our survey, we had 2 validated surveys. The first being the LEAF-Q, which was the low energy availability in female questionnaire. This assessed low energy availability risk in our participants. A score of 8 or greater, meaning indicating that they had a risk of low energy availability. We also used the LEAF-Q to assess menstrual dysfunction. This was for individuals we scored the menstrual function and contraceptive use separately from the remainder of the survey, and a score of greater than 4 indicated menstrual dysfunction. In addition, these were individuals who were not on any type of hormonal contraceptives. And then we also used the DESA-6, which is the Disordered Eating and Screening Assessment tool to assess disordered eating risk. This as well, we used, scored it separately from the remainder of the other questions, and a score of greater than 3 indicated disordered eating risk. So for overall prevalence, for LEA risk in the blue, we had about a 55% of the participants were at risk for low energy availability based off of that greater than 8 score off the LEAF Q. About 40% had a disordered eating risk. That's what we have in the orange. Again, that was based off of the greater than 3 score using the DESA. And then we had about 44% who had reported menstrual dysfunction with that score on the LEAF Q of greater than 4 just for the menstruation section. Again, with these individuals who were not on any type of hormonal contraceptive to influence that data. So to conclude, female recreational athletes do have a high risk for low energy availability, disordered eating, and menstrual dysfunction. Comparing my preliminary data compared to what the research and literature has thus far, a lot of it is on elite level athletes. For example, one study looking at LEA for elite runners, post their season, about 54% of them were experiencing LEA symptoms. So we are right up there with that data. For disordered eating risk, in an earlier slide, it showed between 6 and I believe it's 45% of elite athletes are at risk for disordered eating. Again, we fall along that spectrum with my results. And then for menstrual dysfunction, there was a study looking at ultra endurance athletes, and about 50% of them experienced disruption in their menstruation throughout the peaks of their training. So again, we're a little bit below that, but reflecting my data based off of elite level athletes, they are very, very close, if not similar. However, recreational athletes can be often overlooked due to the lack of resources that elite level athletes, maybe even collegiate athletes have, where these recreational athletes do not. So overall, that just makes me want to look more into this, and we want to further our research and establish more preventative measures around low energy availability, disordered eating amongst these female recreational runners. So I don't have a question slide, but. That was based off of, it's more of a higher level of training compared to someone that just may run a few times a week. We wanted running to be kind of their primary form of exercise as like a baseline. Yeah, so we capped it at 40 to avoid any type of premenopausal, more so for the menstruation aspect of it. So we stopped it at 40. It just gets a little bit more finicky. Yes, it was high. It was somewhere around like 60%. So it was less who were not. And for those individuals, I did look at menstrual dysfunction, and it was about that 40 to 50% were experiencing it as well. However, I don't necessarily know how they could tell if they were on a hormonal contraceptive. So I would guess it would just be based off of the questions from LEAF Q.
Like, is it more heavily weighted in one area that's bumping up their score? Just yell at me. It's fine. Like across the two different surveys. Yeah, which is eventually what I'm going to be looking at. This is kind of the first question of just prevalence. So I will get back to you on that in like a year or so. Yeah. That's all right. I don't know how to do this Zoom stuff. Oh, I didn't know. For like sharing it. If that's, yeah. I hope there was no questions, but I didn't. I just exit out. Is that at 2:30? Oh, that was mine. All right. Oh.
The color scheme. I give you green.
Yes. Yellow is 2.
Red is
Yeah. Okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome. So again, my name is Ella Carroll, and my research project was on the affected dietary factors on the prevalence of multimorbidity that increase the risk of COVID-19 severity in U.S. adults. So just a brief introduction, I'm sure we all know, but COVID-19 was declared a pandemic on March 11, 2020 by the World Health Organization, and coronavirus has affected over 146 million Americans in the US alone, with over 921,000 lives lost. There are several risk factors for COVID-19, and these can lead to severe illness, hospitalization, admission into the intensive care unit, intubation, medical ventilation, so people being put on a ventilator, as well as mortality. So these risk factors are identified by the CDC, and they are based on age, race, gender, certain medical conditions and medication, poverty and crowding, as well as occupation and pregnancy. In the case of my research, I focused on medical conditions. Multimorbidity is defined as having 2 or more chronic conditions, and it is really complicated as you have these clustering of diseases, and it's really difficult for providers to kind of figure out what is the proper treatment plan, what disease
become precedent in which to treat first, and there are also several factors alone that can affect multimorbidity. So socioeconomic status, education, occupation, race, ethnicity, as well as dietary factors. And again, in the case of my research project, I focus on the effect of dietary factors. So according to the Dietary Guidelines for Americans, also known as the DGA, which its purpose is to combat and prevent diseases, the U.S. population is not meeting nutritional needs. Americans are slowly but steadily developing multimorbidity, and as we know, COVID-19 is still pretty relevant. The purpose of this project was to investigate the effect of dietary factors, so that was sodium, saturated fat, total sugar, alcohol, and fiber, on the prevalence of multimorbidity that increased COVID-19 severity. This project was a continuation of Jacqueline Flaherty's study, which was the prevalence of underlying medical conditions that increased COVID-19 severity. And this project was vital in identifying those dietary factors that may lead to a higher prevalence of multimorbidity. As for the methods, data of 19,225 people from 2015 to 2018 was previously collected by the Nutritional Health and Examination Survey, also known as NHANES. This was collected in in-home interviews or in the Mobile Exam Center, also known as the MEC Center. Characteristics of these subjects included males and females, ages greater than or equal to 20 years with no upper age limit, and race was also self-reported. Subjects were stratified into groups and assessed for the prevalence of multimorbidity among each characteristic. So in my project, multimorbidity was defined as having 2 or more of these chronic conditions, and those conditions included cancer, chronic kidney disease, type 2 diabetes, smoking status, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, congestive heart failure, obesity, hypertension, and coronary heart disease. Furthermore, subjects were excluded if they were less than 20 years old or pregnant and or lactating, which left us with a subject sample size of 10,530 participants. And this project was deemed exempt by the Central Washington University Human Subjects Review Board. So for the participants statistics, most of my subject population was white with 34%, and about the lowest race/ethnic group was non-Hispanic Asians with 13.1%. Multimorbidity prevalence was shown to increase with age as well. So you can see that starting with the darker blue in the age group of 20 to 39 years, about 26% of them had multimorbidity. When the age group was 40 to 59 years, about 46% of them had multimorbidity. And when you get up to those upper age years of 60 years and older, almost 2/3 of that population had multimorbidity, or 67%. So when looking at overall multimorbidity compared with the subject population, overall 45% of participants had multimorbidity, and males tended to have a higher prevalence with about 47% than females, which had about 43%. And here's a table that I took directly from my manuscript. It's table 1, prevalence of 2 or more COVID risk factors. But you can see here that the highest prevalence, the highest prevalence among race and ethnicity groups was non-Hispanic Blacks, with about 51% of that population having multimorbidity. And again, the lowest was non-Hispanic Asian with about 27.5%. And so when looking at average intakes of fiber, sodium, and total sugar and saturated fat intakes compared to DGA recommendations, on average, participants consumed about 7.9 grams of fiber per 1,000 calories per day, when the DGA recommendation was 14 grams per 1,000 calories per day. Sodium, they consumed on average about 3,500 milligrams per day, when the DGA recommendation was less than 2,300 milligrams per day. Total sugar intake, participants consumed about 19.8% of their calories coming from total sugar per day, when the adjusted DGA recommendation was less than 15.4%. And for saturated fat, people consumed on average 12% of their calories coming from saturated fat per day, when the DGA recommendation was less than 10% of calories. And finally, for alcoholic drinks, both males and females consumed on average 3.5 drinks per day, when the DGA recommendation was less than 2 drinks for men and less than 1 drink for women. So when looking at DGA recommendations compared to multimorbidity, you can see that in the darker green of the participants who did not meet the DGA recommendations, they have a higher prevalence of multimorbidity, with the exception of alcohol. Alcohol, when people consumed more than the DGA recommendations, it showed that they had a lower prevalence of multimorbidity. And this was another figure taken directly from my manuscript, that is odds ratio of multimorbidity of people meeting versus not meeting the dietary guidelines for Americans. And you can see that participants who did not meet fiber intake, about 40% of them had an increased greater odds of developing multimorbidity. Sodium was not really significant. For saturated fatty acids, about 13% of them, for saturated fatty acids, there was a 13% greater odds of developing multimorbidity. And interestingly, for alcohol, when exceeding the recommended amounts of alcohol per day, participants had a 13% less greater odds of multimorbidity. And total sugar wasn't significant as well, but when participants did not meet the recommendations, there was a 6% increased risk of multimorbidity. So in conclusion, in addition to other factors, we see that dietary factors can play a significant role in increasing the prevalence of multimorbidity that increases the severity of COVID-19. Although this doesn't only pertain to COVID-19, it can pertain to other different diseases as well, and overall health of the general population. And just for a recap, fiber and saturated fat and alcohol were most significant. Alcohol had a protective factor, interestingly, and sodium and total sugar intake were not significant. And I just want to say thank you for listening, and are there any questions? Yes and no. So for saturated fat and fiber, when looking at the dietary guidelines for Americans, they were nutrients that were already reported that were being like consistently exceeded, especially like during my literature review, it was like, I think it was 90% of women and 97% of men don't meet like recommended fiber intakes. For total sugar, I was a little bit surprised. I think it has to do with total sugar is a little bit different than added sugar, where added sugar is like, in soda, where total sugar is like added sugar, total sugar in fruit or bread or milk. And so it kind of didn't surprise me that it was significant, but I don't know. Yeah. Yes. Yes. Yeah. 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 So that was really interesting. So when I did my defense last week, I kind of like, based on my literature review, it seemed to depend on the type of alcohol being drank. So in most studies with like red wine intake, there was shown a protective effect against many of like these multimorbidities. And I think that's kind of due to perhaps the like antioxidant effect that red wine has, whereas like beer or spirits or just like plain like vodka isn't really like nutritive. And I think it depends also like on the amount being drunk. So, for example, like one of the things I would do differently if I were to do this study again was to perhaps do a range, because I only define the variable as like more than 2 drinks or more than one or then less than. And so like with that, like I think it depends, because in the research I see that like heavily drinking and like binge drinking definitely associated with like tons of multimorbidities. But there's kind of this sweet spot that's like maybe like light to moderate drinking of like 1 or 2 drinks a day that seems to be protective. And for your second question, I did not distinguish between males and females. Although, if I were to do this again, I definitely would, because I think there would be a difference, definitely in that. So, yeah.
Hello, everyone. As you just heard, my name is Nathaniel Della Rosa. I'm a senior studying applied mathematics here at Central, and we'll be analyzing drug deaths in the U.S. The data set that we used is the National Institute on Drug Abuse's data for the last 20 years. So the year span is going to be 99 to 2020. And the question we're hoping to answer here is just, has public policy helped to mitigate the damages caused by drug use? And so to do that, we're just going to look at the drug death data and not the actual policies themselves, just for simplicity and rough estimate. So the first numerical method that we're going to use to analyze the data is Lagrange interpolating function. So what this does is it just takes the data points that we have and it fills in the gaps. So we force our polynomial to go through the points. And so on the top I have the data points themselves, and then on top of it I have the Lagrange interpolator, and you can see there's not a virtual difference. The difference does come in play when looking at the numerical derivative versus the Lagrange derivative. And so what we're looking at in that bottom graph is the rate of change for those functions. And you can see as we get closer and closer to the edges, the Lagrange goes crazy in terms of rate of change, because we're forcing it to go through points, and it makes the function behavior kind of erratic. The second numerical method we use is cubic spline. So for this one, we're going to break our data set into smaller intervals, and then once we have our smaller intervals, we're going to capture the numeric value, the rate of change, and the concavity, first and second derivatives, and that just helps us to have a much smoother approximation. And you can see in that bottom one, the cubic spline derivative, it's a lot more continuous, and it makes a lot more sense looking at how the cubic spline polynomial is behaving. And then for integration, we have two methods we can use. There's the Simpson's method and the trapezoid method. I'm not going to get into details here today. We did end up using the Simpson's method just because it is more accurate. So what I have here is the total drug deaths and the fentanyl-related deaths. And as you can see, they pair with each other pretty closely. Seems like they have the same behavior. And moving forward, I have total fentanyl and all of the other opioids. The other opioids are there in green. And you can see the total and the fentanyl deaths move really closely with each other in terms of the behavior, whereas the pollen, whereas the other opioids stay much lower and much more consistent. So we can see and make an inference that fentanyl is driving the drug death behavior in the U.S. just because they match so closely together. And then down here at the bottom, I have year over year. So just the raw data of fentanyl deaths versus opioid deaths. And you can see fentanyl starts really slow at the turn of the century, and then as we get closer to 2020, it just explodes. And then I added this graph over here just to make sure that we still take the other opioid seriously, because we can see that on top there are still more overall opioid deaths in the U.S. in the last 20 years as opposed to the fentanyl deaths. So just because fentanyl is driving the behavior of the total deaths doesn't mean that the other ones aren't also causing damage. Because that low consistency will still come up with some big numbers in the long run. And then in conclusion, given how closely the growth of the fentanyl deaths match the growth of the total drug deaths, it's likely that the rise of fentanyl is driving the increase in drugs, and the other opioids have stayed relatively consistent over the last few decades. There is an exception there in 2020, started the pandemic where they all go down, but that's mostly probably due to logistical reasons in terms of drugs are like anything else. They need to be sent places. So if there's nothing moving, no one can do them. So we can say with pretty relative confidence that our efforts to mitigate the damages of drugs over the last 20 years have failed. Here are my citations, references, and that's what I have for you guys today. Any questions? Okay. Yeah. So for the mathematical methods that I use, they're not very good for forecasting. So that's sort of why I stayed in past data. It's very likely though that even if the fentanyl deaths stay consistent where they're at in the next 5-6 years, they'll overtake overall opioid deaths. And this is a simplified model as well, where the reason why there's so many fentanyl deaths is because many other things are laced with fentanyl. So if you're looking at the drug user's intention, it's going to be different than the cause of death. So a lot of people will think they're doing oxys and they'll get fentanyl, or they'll think they're doing cocaine and they'll have fentanyl in there and die. So it's such a cheap drug to manufacture at such a relative strength that you can it's likely to explode just in terms of how easy it is to logistically. Yeah. No. So the data set I used was focused on just the numbers and the demographics. So it does break it down between male and female, and then certain ethnic groups as well. The logistical side of stuff is just stuff that I know coming into it. There is a lot of other interesting things to look at in that data set, so I would encourage you to do so. For instance, I think men are 3 times more likely to die of overdose death than women, and then it's 4 times Hispanic and Black communities. Oh yeah, of course. Appreciate you explaining each graph. Thank you. Who's that? Morgan? Alrighty. Signed out. Your data able to has policy made this worse. So I can't say. So in order to make that claim, I would have to set up a different hypothesis. So I can just say that it hasn't made it better. I can't say that it's made it worse. For there in the chat. So that's a different analysis I would have to do separately because they're not necessarily dependent on each other.